What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the 10-7 MMA Show. We basically have got just a few more before we come to the new year. I think we got today, we got Friday, and then next Monday, and then we're done for 2024. It will be a wrap, which is pretty crazy. But anyways, we wanted to keep the shows going. There's still topics, believe it or not, that are going on, despite the fact that we're in a bit of a drought right now in terms of what's going down for the UFC. Hold on, I'm just switching my microphone to my. There we go. Yeah, for some reason my Blue Yeti is not picking up the audio, and then I have to every time manually switch it. But now it should sound much better. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining. If you guys are watching today and still hungry for some good old-fashioned MMA news, but we are coming to the close, and there are some interesting things we want to talk about. But right off the top, one thing that I thought would be really fun, which we did touch on a little bit on Friday, but just very superficially, is some fights that are being talked about and potentially discussed and announced for 2025. So I just thought we could kind of jump through and just talk about what fights we are most excited about and why for this upcoming year of 2025. Another thing, Justin, by the way, you know that the UFC right now is renegotiating their, I think it's their TV rights deals. So they're in the process of figuring out how they're going to, who's going to be hosting the fights going forward. I heard Ariel Helwani today talk about the fact that he thinks it's going to stay with ESPN. But I think it's a really interesting time for the UFC business-wise because, as a lot of people have been saying, Sean O'Malley just talked about this recently, the pay-per-view model it might be coming to an end. A lot of people are ripping the streams, stealing the streams, and they're just not getting the same numbers that they used to get back in the day. So I'm really curious to know if they're going to switch over to some premium type model, if they're going to start doing partnership brands with Netflix and so on and so forth. I don't know. It's a very interesting time for the UFC, and I think the change will probably be good for the UFC organization as a whole, and hopefully for the fighters as well. Justin, have you heard anything about their negotiations on the TV rights side or anything like that?
I haven't, and I know a lot of it they're contributing, like you're saying, to the hackers getting on. But at the end of the day, there's just too many events, and you know what? It's every weekend there's an event. It's hard to stay, even for me, who's surrounded by it all the time. It's like, imagine trying to buy a pay-per-view every 2 weeks. That's just so much money, and I think that's why their numbers are dropping. I don't think it has anything to do with the hackers because, I think that has it's a contributing factor. I don't think that's the main factor. I think the main factor is just purely there's just too many events, and buying pay-per-view, especially for Joe Schmo, somebody like me who doesn't have $80 at bi-weekly to pay. I think that's what's hurting their numbers so bad.
Sure. That's another thing that they did mention as well. I think right now they have 43 events per year. Are they going to increase it? Is it going to stay the same? What's going to happen on that front? I think there's a lot of interesting questions, but these will be answered. Now, those guys on the Ariel Helwani show said that this is going to be a very interesting story that's going to evolve in 2025. I guess we'll have to see how it takes form. And I think for us as consumers, as opposed to investors, will it even end up changing the end product? I don't think it's going to change it that substantially, but it might be great for fighters. Who knows? Is the UFC planning to give a percentage of this new rights deal to the fighters, or are they not? Or will the money trickle down in some other ways? Hopefully it does in some form or fashion, but that remains to be seen exactly how. Okay, let's get into some of these fun topics. The first thing I want to talk about is, let's just riff. Let's talk about some of the fights that we know are likely going to happen or could happen in 2025. We got a long time, a full year of all sorts of things to unfold. And we've already heard rumors of so many things that might be in the mix, that might be changing. I even heard Robert Whitaker recently say that he's been toying with the idea of moving up to light heavyweight, talking about how big of a guy he is and how the weight cut's pretty difficult, or maybe not crazy difficult, but he's like, yeah, people don't realize I'm a big dude. That would be crazy. But what are some of the fights that you think are going to go down in 2025? You could even talk about fights that have already been scheduled, including your boy with Sean Strickland and Dricus. What are some of the things that you cannot wait for in 2025?
A lot of people think this is going to be a snooze fest, but I am looking forward to the Merab versus Umar fight. A lot of people, whoever has the best wrestling, they're just going to take each other down. When you have two incredible wrestlers / grapplers like Umar and Merab, a lot of times their wrestling will cancel each other out, and they'll end up striking on their feet a lot. And that's one of the. I have 5 fights this year that I'm really looking forward to. Merab and Umar being one of them for sure.
Oh my God! If people are not excited about that, they've lost their minds. Plus, there's actually real heat, and I don't know if I'd want to call it beef, but Merab definitely, for better or for worse, had a real problem with Umar during the presser, and I think that always makes the fight a little bit more interesting. But people forget that Umar is like a tremendous striker. His kickboxing is incredible. People just think about him as a grappler because he's part of the whole Dagestani crew and whatnot, but he's an amazing striker. So the striking is going to be pretty dope. And Merab, I think, will come to fight and throw blows as well. It's going to be a really, really interesting fight. One thing I am curious about with that matchup, and even if it is wrestling, I don't see why that's boring. You know, it's going to be the highest level of grappling we can imagine, but one thing that is kind of interesting on both sides, for Merab, the fight has been made on relatively short notice. I've heard some people talking about that. I actually heard Sean O'Malley on your boys podcast. What's his name? We were talking about him last time. What's your boy at Extreme Couture who's boys with Nate Diaz, grappling? Jake Shields. He was on Jake Shields' podcast talking about the Merab fight. But yeah, so Merab's kind of had to take this on short notice. And then on Umar's side, Umar had like an arm fracture. So I'm wondering how that's all going to play out. But yeah, this is going to be a really, really great fight for any true mixed martial arts fan. All right, what else you got? What else are you excited about? Or you want me to throw one out there?
No, we got Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. Obviously, there's actually real beef in that fight. I think that both guys.
All right, I think we lost Justin. Hopefully he'll jump back on, I imagine.
I'm switching back over to the internet here, so it's gonna.
Yep. Okay, we lost you for a second. But yeah, so you're saying Sean Strickland and Dricus. What are you excited about that?
Yeah, I mean, just the heat going into the fight. Mm-hmm. I think Dricus is a great fighter. He's really won me over as a fan. And, obviously Sean Strickland as my teammate. And the thing I'm most looking forward to is what is Sean going to do different in this fight compared to his first fight? And, that's really going to show the progress and the levels of Sean Strickland and, how much better or worse he's gotten since his fight with Dricus the first time.
I think it's going to be very interesting. I think Dricus has definitely won a lot of people over with what he did to Izzy. And obviously, he had a very close fight against Sean Strickland. I think Dana White even said he believes Sean Strickland won that fight, but it was razor close. And he's tough. And Dricus is a pretty good smack talker, actually. I think he's quite underrated there, but I like Dricus. I like his personality. I like the way he kind of mixes it up and talks smack. I'm curious I know it got a little heated between the two of them at one point, and then they kind of settled down. I'm curious to know in what direction the pre-fight presser and all that stuff is going to go. Our emotions going to run higher? Are they going to just kind of keep it chill and fight it out? But that's going to be a really exciting one. Okay, I'm going to piggyback off of that and say what that's going to lead to. This is the fight that I'm most excited about for 2025 because we're going to see the return of Khamzat Chimaev. That's going to be wild. We're going to talk about the rumors at some point too, which I think are nonsense, that they're talking about putting Khamzat versus Pereira in a super fight at what's it called, light heavyweight. I just don't think that's going to happen. Also, I know Khamzat's supposed to be at the Strickland Dricus fight in Australia. I feel like they're lining that up and they want him. Like, why are they moving him divisions all of a sudden? And then also, how can you really win with Khamzat and Pereira fighting each other? One of them is going to lose, and they're both the two probably. I mean, would you say they're the two biggest stars in the UFC right now? I would say yes, but I mean,
I don't think so. I mean, Khamzat's great, I know, but you love him so much that he's always going to be the biggest star in the UFC to you. Which is fine. I don't think he's the biggest star. I just don't. I mean, I don't see him in headlines very much. I mean, he's very popular. Don't get me wrong, and especially with his last performance. But I mean, you got to go. You got to go to the champ killer, the legend killer, Ilia Topuria. You got the two fighters of the year, Ilia Topuria, Alex. Obviously, are up there. But I just don't think. I mean, Khamzat again, incredible performance against Robert Whittaker. I don't think he's done enough to be considered one of the. I mean, he is great. Don't get me wrong; he's very popular. But I mean, you got guys like Jon Jones and shit. And again, this is just my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right over you because I'm a pro or anything like. I just personally don't feel he's done enough. He hasn't even fought for a championship yet. He hasn't won a belt yet. He hasn't done enough yet for me to be called him one of the most popular guys right now. And again, I just don't hear enough people talking about him. When I'm at the gym, I'm not talking about other fighters. I'm talking about the civilians because I coach a lot of civilian classes too. And they're always asking me my opinions of this and that. And,
not a lot of guys besides you, not a lot of guys are talking about Khamzat. And again, very popular. It has an incredible rise coming. I just don't think the civilians are talking about him enough to be considered one of the greats.
Fair point. I'll say that to me, that is one of my most anticipated fights, but I get that maybe not a lot of other folks are as excited about that. What do you think about, obviously, the fight that everybody's been talking about a lot is Jon Jones versus what's called Tom Aspinall. And we're going to talk later about Jon Jones's 5-year plan. He recently talked about this when he did a show on some YouTube channel. He was like driving a Bugatti around, and he talked about what he wants to do this year and over the next 5 years, and then how he eventually wants to transition into acting. But do you think if Jon Jones and Aspinall fight this year, which I think they're going to, or if they fight, do you think it's going to happen in 2025, or you think it's going to be somewhere down the line?
It has to be in 2025, man. Jon Jones is not getting any younger. And remember the old saying, out of sight, out of mind. He needs to strike while the iron's hot. He just beat Stipe. Again, I know you're really excited about his performance. I thought the fight was lackluster. And honestly, I am excited about the matchup for Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. But a lot of times when you get a lot of hype behind these fights, they go underwhelming. And again, I didn't think Jon looked anything special against an old Stipe that hasn't fought in 25 years. I think it was more nostalgic seeing, such a legend jump in there again after all that time off. But I wasn't overly impressed with his performance. I don't know, man. It's again excited about the matchup, but I have a bad feeling that it's going to be very underwhelming.
Oh man, I think I feel the opposite. I think he's going to smoke Aspinall. Aspinall was asked on Piers Morgan, where are you better than Jon Jones, or are you better than Jon Jones in any particular department? And he said no. He himself, now again, maybe he's just being modest, but he's like, no, I'm not better than him anywhere, but I'm younger and I'm bigger than him. That's what he said. That's what his response was. So that to me was pretty telling. And I mean, for him to admit, and Aspinall's a really honest, good guy. I don't know, man. It's pretty exciting to me, especially just because everybody's built up this narrative, which I think Jon Jones eventually leaned into, and partially why he's going to get such a big payday. But there's just been this big narrative that people think Aspinall will all of a sudden beat Jon Jones, and that's why he didn't want to fight him, and that's why he was saying he wanted to fight Stipe and all this stuff, which I think is not true. And I think Jon Jones is going to win, but because of the false narrative that was also spurred on and pushed forward from like all these Aspinall fans, especially the MMA Guru and other YouTubers like this, now it's built up all this anticipation, like he's running away and then now he's going to come back. I think he's going to win. I think it's going to be cool. I think the way that this whole story has evolved, if this fight does happen in 2025, which I think you're right, Jon Jones is about to be 38. It's got to go down now. Now is the time. This is going to be my second most anticipated fight of 2025, I would say. Now, you mentioned Ilia Topuria. Let's talk about him for as another example. He's saying he wants to move up to lightweight for a number of reasons. I think one thing he said is the cut to featherweight has just become too much for him. He's way too big in his opinion, or whatever his manager said. Is that a fight that's really exciting for you? Let's say he does move up and he fights Charles Oliveira, which has been talked about. How excited are for you for that matchup?
Man, Charles Oliveira, one of my favorite fighters. So anytime he's getting in there, man, you're talking about a guy that has very underestimated striking, and he's a world-class striker. And obviously, his grappling is some of the best in the division, especially off his back. So yeah, anytime Charles Oliveira gets in there and it's scrap, I'm very excited, especially against a guy, the legend killer, Ilia Topuria. Don't care for his mic skills, but I tell you what, I think the guy can fight. Again, he's the legend killer. He knocked out Volkanovski. And he knocked out Max Holloway back to back.
Yeah.
Like, how can you not be excited about this guy anytime he steps in the cage?
You know what they should do is, now as he's moving up to lightweight, they should put him against Paddy Pimblett. That would be sweet.
Ilya?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be a gift, man. When you're knocking out guys like Max Holloway and knocking out guys like Volkanovski. No, I mean, you don't go against guys like Pimblett. I mean, no. That'd be a Christmas gift. That'd be an early Christmas gift, man.
But you remember the beef that they had, right? Where
they were talking, and that's the thing. Patty can get under anybody's skin.
Yeah,
it's good. I don't. Well, hold on one second. My buddy just came by.
Yeah, no worries. The interesting thing, guys, I will say this. Hold on. I'm gonna mute Justin's mic there. So the interesting thing is that Patty, I mean, this is how fighters got to be, I guess, right? But Patty himself said here, I'll unmute you there, Justin. So the thing is that Patty himself said that he's like, I know you guys think I'm crazy, but he's like, I think I beat Ilya if he came up and fought him. So he's confident. He thinks he could do it. I wonder what fight Patty would have to win to eventually get that grudge match, because they legit hate each other to like so much. It'd actually be a good fight, even if Ilya steamrolls him just because of the buildup. But yeah, that's more of a fantasy. But I think it would be really cool to see Ilya move up and fight Oliveira. And the cool thing is, as much as Islam said, hey, I don't want to fight Ilya because I keep having to fight the featherweights and people don't give me credit for it. If he moves up and beats Oliveira, then Islam said, well, then of course I have to fight him. Then of course I would be happy to fight him because he's proven himself in the lightweight division. He would have beaten the number one contender, and then that would make sense. So I think that's a pretty exciting.
Put me on mute for 1 second. I gotta grab something real quick.
Sure. Okay, no worries. Now, another thing I would talk about, I think we have to talk about another potential exciting matchup in 2025. The thing is, will it happen? What's going to go down is Conor McGregor. Okay. Is he going to finally make his return? I know he recently was posting about Logan Paul, and we're going to talk about that actually right now. Folks, Michael Chandler even responded and said, is trying to bring up their fight one more time. And then this time people were really clowning Chandler and being like, dude, you keep chasing this fight. Have some respect for yourself, like stuff like that, like kind of going in on him. Say what you will. I get why he wants it, but it's just beating such a dead horse at this point. But anyways, this takes us to conversations that apparently are ongoing and continuing with McGregor essentially potentially facing Logan Paul in a boxing match. Now, people have treated it with some level of seriousness for a number of reasons. Number one, the Ambani family, which has a net worth of $120 billion, an Indian family that is saying that they're going to put on the fight, sponsor the fight, and have it be based in India, since they're lending some credibility to the fact that this might happen. But I want to explain why, and I'm going to unmute you now, Justin. I'm going to explain why, in my opinion, I want to hear your thoughts as well. Well, I don't think that there's any truth to this, any validity to this. And for me, it's more just like me putting myself in Dana White's shoes or in the executive management of the UFC in their shoes, why I would never allow this to happen. Now, why do I think this was even brought up in the first place? I think this was, again, Conor trying to push the UFC to get him a fight earlier. They're saying he's not going to fight till the end of 2025. As I've mentioned in other videos, I think Conor's likely in some dire financial straits. I think he's probably under severe financial pressure right now. Again, as I think he's got a lot of recurring costs and crazy expensive habits that have gone out of control. And now with this verdict coming down and him being found civilly liable and all these other revenue streams starting to dry up and almost getting like persecuted, he needs money. He needs a fight. He can't wait. I think he can't wait until the end of 2025. This reminds me, if you guys remember back in 2021, I want to say, when Conor was not being given a fight in the UFC. And what did he do? He offered to fight. He was trying to set up a charity exhibition fight with him and Dustin Poirier. So he was setting up a charity bout. Charity is the key here because he wasn't getting paid, and that wouldn't have violated, I don't think, the UFC contract. And I think that was the idea. So we started putting this together. Dustin Poirier agreed. He was going to donate money to I think Dustin Poirier's Fight Foundation. That's when the UFC stepped in. They got involved. They talked to both of them. They scheduled the fight. That was their first rematch, you could say. What I think Conor's doing with that tweet, I don't think there was any seriousness to this, because the fact that he's trying to schedule, whether or not it's an exhibition, he's playing to get paid. I'm sure that's a violation of his contract, and I'm sure there's no way this would happen without the UFC signing off on it. I think he only brought it up to get himself back into the headlines and also to pressure the UFC to try and make something happen, with other people saying, hey, all right, let's do this fight or let's do something else. Try and get something rolling. I don't think he really wants to fight Logan Paul in a boxing match, but that's my hypothesis, even though he would make a ton of money theoretically from it. But now the other reason why I want to throw this out there, and then I want to hear your thoughts, Justin. The other reason why I think this will not happen is as follows. The one time that the UFC made an exception and went into business with the, this whole notion of like Conor having a boxing match while in a UFC contract was against Floyd Mayweather. The difference with that fight, and I talked about this in another video, is that Floyd was considered is still, I guess, in some ways, considered the greatest boxer of all time. Conor was taking on a gargantuan challenge where everybody expected him to lose. So he went in, took this fight, And he actually performed pretty well. I think he performed better than people thought. People thought he was going to get completely smoked, but he did pretty good for the first few rounds. It was an interesting match. Eventually, Floyd won, but it still raised Conor's stock and his value. And it also, I think, raised the brand of the UFC. But fast forward to now, to today, almost 7 years later, the UFC is in an entirely different position. It arguably has eclipsed boxing as a whole. Some would agree, some would disagree, but I think we can say at least has gotten on equal footing. Let's put it like that. The UFC doesn't need boxing. They don't need a boxing bout to promote their fighters. On top of that, we're not talking about Conor fighting like Tyson Fury or like the greatest boxer of all time. He's fighting Logan Paul, who's a social media influencer who's had a few boxing matches, wasn't able to knock out Dylan Dennis, had a terrible fight against him, and he's got a major size advantage against Conor. They go in and they have a boxing match. Logan beats Conor. If I'm in charge of the UFC or part of the executive board, I'm going to say no way in hell are we allowing our biggest, our most popular star still probably to go in and lose an embarrassing boxing match against Logan Paul or potentially lose, even if he doesn't lose, but even if he has like a close match and barely wins, that to me devalues the brand of the UFC, because a lot of people who don't really think about the difference between boxing and real fighting, they might say, wow, this is Logan Paul guy's beating and they might think still Conor's in his prime. He's like the greatest UFC fighter of all time, and he's beating him. What does that say about the UFC brand as a whole? So to me, I think it's way too risky. I think there's absolutely no chance that anything like this happens. The only way Conor would ever fight Logan is well after he's out of his UFC contract. And I bet you the UFC would even prefer that he never took that fight if they could block it somehow. But anyway, so that's why I think all this talk about him fighting Logan, regardless of them being under the same umbrella of ownership under TKO, I don't think any of it's likely to happen whatsoever. Justin, what's your take?
You hit the nail on the head, man. That's exactly right. It's too much of a risk for the UFC. It's too much of a risk for Conor McGregor. Logan Paul went to decision with Floyd Mayweather. You know, he's huge. I just don't see what Conor could go in there and do, especially with all his new habits, his drug habits. Like, how's his gas tank going to be trying to bully around? Even though technique-wise, obviously, he's going to be better, I just can't see where he's going to find a spot to finish. And I can't see him knocking him out. I can't see him outlasting him. I think it's a lose-lose for Conor McGregor and the UFC.
Yeah, Logan's way bigger. It's just way too risky. I would never do it if I was the UFC. It's kind of like when people talk about cross promotions with Francis Ngannou. They can't do that because the risk is too high. If you have a PFL fighter beating their greatest fighter of all time while under the PFL banner, you can't do that. Now, you know, taking Francis and bringing him back under the UFC banner, that could be different, right? That opens up the potential possibility. But anyways, I don't think this will happen. Quick showing a couple comments from Engal for Productions. He says he got robbed against Charles Rosa. And he also says, brother, who y'all got for Islam Arman? Man, I got Islam, but then I listened to an interview of Arman today, and he's just so confident. He explains why he thinks he can win. I don't know, but I still have to go with Islam. I still feel like Islam is almost invincible and unbeatable in this sport. And the way he's evolving and getting better, and now his striking is just so awesome. And he just seems to be as dominant as Khabib was. He seems to be better than Khabib. I just can't really go against Islam. What do you think? Islam versus Arman?
Man, it's hard. How can you go against the best pound for pound fighter in the world, especially what he's done to the lightweight division, man? It's going to be tough. I know it's a rematch, and you know, Arman has gotten a lot better since their first fight. But so is Islam, man. And again, the way he's been handling the division, just running through guys, knocking out Volkanovski, you know, handling Oliveira, submitting Oliveira. Like, I just can't right now. I just can't see him losing.
Great fight against Dustin Poirier. I know. I feel like Islam didn't get a lot of credit for that fight because everybody just assumed he was going to beat Dustin Poirier, which is just crazy. But like, I think that was because of what happened between Dustin and Khabib. So people felt that way. But that was an amazing fight, and that was tremendous. And Dustin, by the way, Islam mentioned, Dustin really got a lot better from when he fought Khabib to when he fought Islam in terms of his takedown defense and his grappling skills. So Islam has done his due diligence. He's like definitely fought the best of the best and come out pretty dominant in all those fights. I just can't go against him. But it's going to be a great fight. UFC 311 is going to be wild. Okay. And we've got Umar versus Merab. I think we've talked about that. I mean, I've got Umar. Do you have a strong feeling one way or the other, or are you kind of on the fence here?
You know, I think Umar's going to edge, but it's hard to go against a guy I know personally, man. Merab is just such a character, and I want him to win so bad. He's just such a nice guy on and off the mat. And, you know, it's hard to root against him, but I do think Umar has the edge here.
All right, here we go. And Louisa says, hello, 10-7. What's up, Louisa? She's helping us behind the scenes. Just a quick comment. Very cool. Okay. First comment on the show. Okay, very cool. All right, so now let's move on. I want to hit these rumors of Khamzat versus Pereira. And I want to tell you what, I mean, I've been seeing it in the headlines. I almost wonder if it's just purely because there's nothing else going on that people are just making this up. But to me, tell me if you agree or disagree. Fine, you say Khamzat's not one of the biggest stars in the UFC or not the biggest, but I'm just saying that based on social media numbers and the amount of views his videos and interviews get. But I get that you could say maybe Ilya would trump him, or maybe Islam or things like that. But let's say at least he's in the top 10. Let's put it like that.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
I just don't, especially when he's on the precipice of getting a title shot in the middleweight division, I just don't see why you would move him up, especially if you're going to move him up, at least let him get that belt in the middleweight division first, and then let him go up and get this double champ status. I would believe that would have to make sense. I mean, because again, think about it. He was right about to get a welterweight shot. Now he's moved up to middleweight. Now he kind of had to work his way back up in the middleweight division. Now he's right there. And then you're going to I just don't see it. And then on top of that, it's kind of like when you were upset about when they put Ian Gary against Shavkat, right? Like two undefeated guys. Why are you destroying their undefeated records at this point? Because one of them is going to lose. So why would the UFC do that? That seemed like a bad business move. This to me is that times 1,000. Why would you go up? And I would actually be kind of upset to see this fight, because I feel like Pereira would lose. I don't want to see him lose like that, as much as I want to see Khamzat win. I don't want to see that, at least not yet. Let them both kind of build their legacy out a little bit longer. And then if you eventually want to have a super fight down the line, just not now. I mean, what is your take? What do you think?
Spot on, bro. Wish I could have said it better myself, man. This is just like the Ian Gary Shavkat thing. Is one of these guys is going to lose, and unfortunately, at this point in their career, I don't want to see either of them lose. I want to see them both keep building and then build a super fight down the road. Like you said, let him get the champ. Let him get the middleweight championship. Let him defend it once or twice and be like, all right, I want to be the double champ, and go on and have a super fight against, as of right now, the unbeatable, Alex Pereira, man, and build these guys up to make them look like unbeatable machines, and then have a super fight and get everybody excited about it. Yeah, it's a little too early on, and again, I just still disagree with the Shavkat Ian Gary decision. Putting two undefeated guys that haven't even fought for the belt yet against each other. I think get the champ, build one of those as your champ, and then have the other undefeated guy come in and make this huge build up before the fight and get people excited about the fight.
Right on. Okay, moving on to Jon Jones. As I mentioned, he had an interview recently where he's like driving around in a Bugatti for like 45 minutes. And he does talk about his UFC career. And one of the things he mentions is that he's got a 5-year plan, and he wants to fight most likely at least once, which we know, Tom Aspinall, but maybe 2 more times. And then he wants to transition into a career in Hollywood. He's already apparently taken on some roles. He was apparently in this show called Le Cage. It's like a French show. I've watched a little bit of it on Netflix. It's really good. I need to watch more of it, but it's about MMA. It's about an MMA gym in Paris. It's all in French though, so it's you have to hear like the dubbing in English. That kind of takes away a little bit from the show, but it's still good. And yeah, so apparently he's made a debut in that show. He's thinking about some other movie roles, which is super cool. I think it's awesome for Jon Jones to be going into Hollywood if that's something he wants to do. But he does mention these 2 fights. Now, if he fights let's play this out. If he fights Tom Aspinall and loses, which I don't think he will, I think he's going to get an immediate rematch, obviously, and they're going to have one more fight. And then I imagine if he wins that, he's going to retire. Okay, but let's say he beats Tom Aspinall. We've, of course, heard his desire to fight Pereira. Is that a fight that you think will happen, or do you see Jon Jones fighting somebody else? What are your thoughts?
I think if he fights Tom Aspinall, he just needs to retire, because if he doesn't, there's going to be that next guy, that next hungry guy that everyone's going to be like, oh, this is the guy to beat Jon Jones. And it's just going to be a never-ending cycle. I think Alex is just a little too small for him. I know he's big. He was big for middleweight. He has relatively good size at light heavyweight. But Alex would have to change his diet, would change his lifting routine, change all of his training. I mean, you saw Jon Jones in his last fight. He's freaking huge. He's a heavyweight now, and Alex is not a heavyweight. And they're like, oh, well, they're really close in weight. Man, when they stand next to each other, they don't look very close in weight, man. And I think Jon would just kind of weight bully him around there at heavyweight. midway. What if John goes down to light heavyweight? Now that would be interesting. I don't see that happening. I think he's going to get comfortable at heavyweight, and he's not going to want to lose any weight. I think it's in John's best interest to go beat Tom Aspinall and retire on the spot.
Okay, one other just pure fantasy option, and I want to ask you about it because the person I'm about to bring up is one of your teammates. Is there any chance whatsoever, or let me put it like this. We had Turki Al-Sheikh go on the Ariel Helwani show and say the fight that he wants to make is, of course, the real big fight in the heavyweight division, not Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones, but the real deal, Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones, who is now in the PFL. PFL is having some trouble, right? We've heard a lot of fighters complain about not having enough fights, and I'm sure they're, it's tough. And we're going to talk about another organization that's coming into the mix in a second, the GFL. But what it is whatever these fight promotions that seem to pop up and try and compete with the UFC, they just cannot do it for a number of reasons. But let's say this continues to go the way it's going. Francis Ngannou in some way is able to work with Turki Al-Sheikh. They're able to negotiate something, and they're able to put this fight on. Holy smokes, that would be the super fight of the century. But what I want to ask you, is there anything that you, and again, not to reveal, confidential information that you've heard, but I mean, are people at your gym at Extreme Couture, Eric Nixick, anybody, are people even taking this whatsoever seriously? Or is this something that's like, no, I know they're talking about it on the Ariel Helwani show, or Turki Al-Sheikh is saying this is a dream matchup, but we're not taking it seriously. Like, have you heard anything along these lines of, is this actually a possibility?
Honestly, man, I haven't seen or heard anybody talk about Francis at the gym in a while, man. I think when he took his break from boxing, he started training at another gym. And again, our lockers are right next to each other, and I've only seen him a handful of times over the last 6 months or even a year. So he hasn't really been putting in a lot of time over at Extreme Couture for whatever reason. But I haven't heard anybody talk about it, including Eric Nixick. And I just saw Eric a couple hours ago, and we chopped it up for a minute.
Yeah, and it's still maybe ways away, right? It's still maybe we have to see what happens with Jon Jones and Aspinall. When does that get scheduled? Is Jon Jones even injury-free right now? He just had a battle against Stipe. So I don't know. What's the timeline? Are we talking this is not even a possibility for another year before they think about it? Who knows? But that could be pretty interesting if Jon Jones does take 2 more fights. Like, what a way to end his career if he fights Tom Aspinall and then they finally make this super fight with Francis. That would be like record-breaking stuff. That would be so crazy, but we can only hope. And I guess let's see what happens. Louisa says she wants to see me fight you. I would smoke you. That's you.
True. Yeah, good Muay Thai. You'd have to keep me away with your range.
Yeah. Justin would annihilate me. Okay, let's keep it going to the last topic. GFL. All right. So the GFL, Ariel did a whole special on this, and I can't even remember what it stands for, but it's again another fight league, fight promotion that they've gotten. Global. That's right, Global Fight League. And now apparently these guys are entering the space. They've got they've got really big names that are being attached to the brand. Tyron Woodley is one of them. I think there's a lot of other fighters that used to be in the UFC that are apparently getting signed to them. They're also, Tyron said that they were getting like boxing money, whatever, basically like really large paydays for taking on fights in this league. But I wanted to talk to you about some of the things that they're changing or they're adding in to like differentiate them from the UFC. And I want to get your thoughts on it. Cause like, I just hate this stuff. Like, I think it's so stupid. It's so unappealing to me. And it destroys to me the purity of how the UFC kind of handles and structures fights. Like, to me, one of the reasons why I love mixed martial arts and the UFC in particular is because it's not a team sport. It is actually, because you have your team and you have your training partners, you have your coaches. It is a team sport, but it's all built around kind of one person going up there, and then the team supports you. But then at the end of the day, boom, it's like a solo mission, and you go on your way, and you have to take on those challenges individually on your own, face your own demons, and you go in, and that's that. It's all you once you get in the cage and they shut that door. And I feel like there's just so many similarities between that and just the things we have to do in our lives. Like, we at the end of the day, we have our support systems, but we got to face certain challenges ourselves on our own and find our own inner strength. Now, sorry, with the GFL, they're talking about turning it into a team game. You have a point system, you have a season, all this stuff that to me is just superfluous. And it's just like, it's like distraction. It's like noise from the purity of the sport. So that is such a turnoff to me. And then on top of it, what are you doing when you're signing on all these former fighters and like, yo, go get your payday. I'm happy for you guys if you're out there and you're getting these fights and you're making money. True. But again, how can you, I just don't see any long-term capabilities for an organization like this. And what are you doing? You're basically taking the end product that the UFC has built through through all this money that they spend on their promotional arm, their marketing arm, to build up these fighters, to turn them into superstars. And then you're just like, you're kind of grabbing them once they've been built up and like just kind of being a vampire off of that star power to promote your own organization. I just don't see how that's a sustainable model, number one. And number two, I'm not a fan of this change of like, hey, let's try to turn this into a sport. The whole point is, what's so special about mixed martial arts is that it's not a sport. It's something completely different, in my opinion. Justin, what's your take on the GFL and all this stuff?
Here's the thing, man. Like Steve Jobs said, it's not about inventing something that's new, that's revolutionary. It's about taking something that's already been made and just making it better. And that's what the GFL is trying to do here. But the problem is, all these ideas have already been tried. They've already tried. They call it the IFL was the same thing, where they had teams at different weight classes. And if you got a knockout, your team got X amount of points. They did it in India, and I was a part of it, the Super Fight League, where you have guys at different weight classes and you fight another team. It's a rinse and repeat. The UFC has no real threats. I thought the PFL was going to come through with all the money they have and pose a threat, or maybe possibly, especially after signing Francis Ngannou. But at the end of the day, nobody compete with the UFC. Nobody compete with the UFC has done, and nobody will compete with the UFC. At the end of the day, they're just going to run out of money eventually, whether it's the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, hell, even 10 years. The PFL has been running for a long time right now. And the fighters are happy. They're getting paid. But again, they just don't have enough events for how many fighters they want to have. And unfortunately, it just draws away, man. Like, I tune into the PFL because the betting lines are insane. But I don't tune in and they have a lot of cool things that they're doing really good, man. They have like round by round scoring. They have, they have AI scoring. They have a lot of great things. They have they put something in your gloves so you can see how fast the punches are coming. They have a lot of great new things coming in. Unfortunately, it's just not the UFC, and and the GFL is not even the PFL. So, at the end of the day, unfortunately, this organization is just going to fizzle out. And you're signing guys like Tyrone Woodley. Like, if you don't remember, Tyrone lost his last fight to Colby Covington. Colby Covington fucking sucks. And unfortunately, it's just, you got to get that new breed of fighters. And the UFC is always going to have upper hand at getting the newest, latest, and greatest fighters.
To me, from the outside, I just don't even understand. Look, and maybe because I don't understand it, and maybe I haven't done my research, but to me, as just like from a business perspective, why would you invest in this? I just don't get it. It's like you're investing in something that you're trying to compete with the UFC by taking fighters that used to fight in the UFC and then just leveraging that star. I just don't get it. And I know, so I'll just read you some of the things that they're trying to do. Whereas instead, what's a much more interesting venture, and I see way more upside, is something like Fusion Fight League, where you're not trying to compete with the UFC. What you're almost essentially becoming a partner with them in a way, right? There's that opportunity where you're building up younger fighters. You're a place for a lot of younger fighters that you can build up and then feed to the UFC. It's almost a two-way partnership and promotional vehicle. And if now you're getting your promotional side right, you can have people come into the UFC, which with that much more momentum. That to me makes a lot of sense. A sort of a symbiotic type of relationship versus I just don't get why anybody would even put any money into this. Apparently they've raised money, so people have done it, but like I just don't get it. But let me go over some of the specifics and intricacies that you talked about. So as you mentioned, it's similar to the IFL, and they're going to use a point system to score fights for the regular season. Like, this is just so lame to me. I don't like the whole. I want to see a fight happen from beginning to end in one setting. I don't want to be like, all right, now what does this mean for the season? Okay, he lost, but that's okay because the rest of his team is keeping it together. That's not what this is about. It's about a competition, individual, one-on-one. Like, let's go. Let's see who the better man is on the night. Not, hey, I'm going to go out there and kind of run the whole time and not really try and fight because we already know our team has a big advantage. So let's not put it all into this fight because we're already up by it. You know what I mean? Like, this whole type of gamesmanship maybe could enter that is just totally uninteresting to me. They have a tournament format where they're going to have brackets, fighters advance based on point systems. They are claiming they're going to have a 50-50 rev share between team owners and athletes. Let's see how that goes. I have argued for a long time. People want to get on the UFC's case. I've argued and felt that the only reason why the UFC doesn't have something like that yet, where they're like, hey, well, they have it in the NBA and the NFL, is the UFC is not those organizations yet. They're still trying to actively build and grow. Is the NBA and the NFL is like, how much money do they allocate to actually expanding the sports? I bet you not that much, because I think to some extent they've probably reached, they're getting pretty close to market saturation, would be my guess, because they're so popular already. They're the biggest sports on the planet. So what more are you doing there? They're already embedded in all these communities. People have football and basketball programs growing up, and that adds to the fandom. The UFC doesn't have that. And I guarantee you that's why they still are spending. I think they're still spending money building up this infrastructure. And then eventually maybe they could have a 50-50 split. But for them to come in, these guys to come in and do that now, I just don't, I don't know. I just don't see how any of this works. Do you have any final thoughts? Are you going to tune in to any of these GFL fights?
If I get signed to the GFL, maybe, sure. It's something I have looked interest into. Right now, obviously, I have my bare knuckle fight coming up in March.
That's right, yeah.
But, for the GFL, I mean, if they want to, hey, show me the money, baby. Show me the money. And, is it something that I'm looking forward to and tuning in? I do like the format, man. It reminds me of like high school wrestling, and it changes the strategy too. And I like the intricacy of changing the strategy and seeing something new. Like the PFL is doing a point system now, and they do a season and they do a playoff. I really like that, because there's no, like, you can take a guy that's, say, ranked 10th, and by the end of the season, he might be fighting for the $1 million at the end, man. So I always like that. Anytime I can see an underdog come in and steal the show, I want to support it. But again, it's not the UFC, and nothing will ever compete with the UFC.
Fair. Or like you look at another organization like BKFC, where again, it's like a different type of sport, but sort of like a similar type of thing. Like BKFC or bare knuckle, what you're about to do, like that to me is really, really cool, because it is a different sport, and the fights play out in a completely different way. And it's not really competing with the UFC. It's a different thing, but there's space for both. I really like that. This whole idea of trying to go head to head and like, I don't know. That's my opinion. You guys let me know if you agree or disagree. We got Marshall U MMA saying PFL, let's see the comment here. PFL could have made a better impact after buying Bellator, but their business strategy is absolutely atrocious. Yeah, and again, I don't know too much about the ins and outs of the business strategy, like the intricacies of it, but just looking at it from the outside, it doesn't seem to make sense to me. But again, exciting things are these younger promotions, again, like the one that me and Justin work for, Fusion Fight League. That to me is very interesting, because you can have a beautiful symbiotic relationship with an organization like the UFC that is as big as it is still on the rise and still making waves and will continue to grow, in my opinion. So that's pretty much it. That's all we got for this Monday, December 23rd. In 2 days, we got Christmas, but we will continue to be making content this week. Justin and I just came out with videos as well, talking about our favorite fights for 2024. I had 3. Justin had one, which was a really great one. Zellhuber versus Ribovich, which was at the UFC Sphere. If you guys remember that, I think that was the first fight on the main card. Maybe the second, I can't remember, but that was a battle that I had forgotten about. So it's a very, very interesting pick for favorite fight of the year. If you guys want to check that out and let us know your comments there. That's it. Justin, you got any last words before we wrap up?
Nah, man, it's been great. And and by the way, we talked on the last show about how it was going to be our last show of the year, guys. Just to reiterate, I know Celine messaged me about it. We're not stopping doing our shows, guys. I think it was just our recap of the year, and maybe the way we worded it. But we're going to be putting out videos there all week, and we're going to be doing our regular Monday, Friday show.
That's right. So thank you guys so much. Marshall U MMA. I feel like you might be a new viewer and a new maybe subscriber. We hope you do subscribe. But if you are new, welcome. Thank you so much. We are still a show in its infancy, but we are gaining a ton of momentum. We are having a blast. So we're going to be doing this show every Monday and Friday. But we got videos coming out pretty much almost every day in between. So check us out. Let us know what you think. And if you're unfamiliar with Justin Guitar Hero James, professional fighter right there. And that's what we think makes the show so special. Of course, I'm just a super fan, but Justin's had 80 fights, I think. But how many professional? 78.
28 pro and 78 as total.
Yeah, so crazy amount of amateur fights. That's nuts. John, obviously former UFC fighter as well. So that's what we think makes our analysis really balanced and really good, is we have the real deal Justin right here giving his insights. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining, and we will see you in the next episode. Take it easy.